Go for it.
Blind man can see a little bit.
You're close to the mic since I'm such a soft speech. Spoken person.
It's with you. Not at you. With you.
We got at least one viewer here. Shout out to Kentucky.
They'll be on it.
There'll be more.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to do a study of Genesis 36 to 37. You might think that's a lot. There is a lot of listing of kings and chiefs, so kind of understand when we get into it. So I'm going to go ahead and pray here.
Yeah.
Father God, we just thank you for the awesome 3 days, Lord, of just putting this together, God. It's been there's so much in here, and even if you dive into chapters that you don't see much in, there's so much in there. So Lord, I just pray, God, speak through me tonight, God. We don't want to hear just man's thoughts. So it's your word, but it's also you speaking through me, God. So I pray, edify the church tonight, God, for the future here, Lord. Bless this study in Jesus' name. All right, so we left off in Genesis 35. I'm going to do a very short recap here. Basically, Rachel passed away from giving birth to Benjamins. Reuben, one of the brothers, was laying with Jacob's concubine. Isaac dies. That's Jacob and Esau's brother. So, of course, when a burial and a service comes around, you bring the family in. Jacob and Esau, here we go again, came in to bury their father. And this is the last time they're really going to be together. It's really interesting because it is an interesting bit of a quiet separation between the two. So I'm going to read Genesis 36, 1-8. It says, "Now these are the records of the generations of Esau, that is, Edom. Esau took his wife from the daughters of Canaan, Adah, the daughters of Elon, the Hittite, and Oholibamah, the daughter of Anna, and the granddaughter of Zibeon, the Hivite. Also Basmath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebaioth, Ada bore Elisha to Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Reol, and Oholibamah bore Jeush, and Jalam, and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, and his sons, and his daughters, and all his household, and his livestock, and all his cattle, and all his goods, which he acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land from his brother Jacob. For their property had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they sojourned could not sustain them because of their livestock. So Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom." So you're talking about a land. I gave you guys a handout that actually, I just wanted, my mind is always on geography a little bit, just so you guys know where everything's coming, so different lands get conquered. But you'll start to see this generation of those, those are the promised, and those that, that are not, that they become like these lands that surround Israel, the future of Israel, and become their enemies. So it's kind of interesting. So you got like all this land, they've got to separate. And this chapter 36 discusses the descendants of Esau. So Jacob's seed is going to continue. The promised seed that will bring the Messiah will continue on. And what's really kind of sad in a way, not sad, but you kind of see it, the only blessing that Esau has in the end of his life here is a material blessing. He just goes on into his, he has this incredible abundance, and it makes me think, it kind of reflected upon sort of that silent separation we have between people that don't follow Christ, that wherever family that go off and they do their own thing. It's sort of like a silent separation. It's friends and family, and they're living comfortably, and they're living in a material blessing, you know, but it's just temporary. Esau's descendants would eventually end in complete destruction, completely wiped out, known as the Edomites. Obadiah, jumping a little bit to Obadiah, Obadiah's judgment was proclaimed against the Edomites, which became the land of Edom, the Edomites. In Obadiah 1:3, it says, "The arrogance of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rocks and the loftiness of your dwelling place, who saw in your heart, who will bring me down to earth." And then later Obadiah 1:6 says, "Because of violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you will be cut off forever." So it's kind of a sad reality, but it's interesting because I'll talk about a little bit later on. In Obadiah, it switches to the judgment of the nations, and it basically says, you know, what you create comes back down on you. Today, the nations of Israel are hated, and many nations show violence against Israel, and the Jews living there today. Now, a lot of people argue corrupt individuals and government, but still, these people are God's people. He hasn't changed one bit. And even in Israel's wickedness, God still warns in a few verses later in Obadiah that Edom shouldn't gloat at the judgments. And it says, "Do not gloat over your brother's day, the day of his misfortune, and do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the days of their destruction. Yes, do not boast in the day of their distress." Edomites are kind of like the world today. They're looking at Israel, they're awaiting its destruction. They're lofty, they're thievish, they're causing strife and violence, and all towards God's people. This was going on then, it's going to go on today. Genesis 36:9-14 says, "These then are the records of the generation of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir." So this goes on to a huge list. I'm not going to read these. It's terrible pronouncing these. You guys can read them yourself. But in the midst of this, you're going to see verses between 9 and 14. You'll see names like Amalek. Becomes the Amalekites, another enemy of Israel. This lists the different chiefs and kings. Chiefs usually were ruled over about 1,000 people, and then the kings were kings. This is the first time you're starting to hear about kings, before even Israel has a king. You're starting to hear about these kings within this line. And then eventually the Edomites would hinder the returning Jews from crossing their land to the promised land in Exodus. So it was grievous. But throughout it, you see the mercy of Edom. For instance, in Deuteronomy 23:7, it says, "You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother." Eventually, in Saul's time, Israel rules over Edom and builds garrisons. But eventually, they proclaim their independence. Obadiah 1:15 ends with a prophetic judgment that redirects a warning to all nations. It says, "For the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head." Historical records show when Islam finally came to conquer the region of Edom, they found it completely uninhabited, and which basically fulfilled the prophecy of Obadiah. And it's interesting because throughout this you see, it's a real quick glimpse of before we move on to chapter 37, of Esau, the descendants of Esau. God has a love and a care and a mercy throughout them, but ultimately, just like in our lives, what we have done comes down on us. It's our ultimate decisions, and that's where the judgment lies. So then we jump over to, it's a bit of a jump, I know, but it's 37. This is Joseph's dream. So here we're continuing on with the promise generation here. And I'll go ahead and read verse 1 to 2. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generation of Jacob. Again, this is, you're going to see throughout this that there is families working together and so forth. They're working on the lands. It says, Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brother while he was still a youth, along with the son of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now, here you have, again, sort of like a favorite. You have that a lot in families. You got like a favorite son. Joseph is the promise. The messianic line comes down through Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
He has been blessed by God. Joseph has been blessed by God. He's been blessed as being the favorite of Jacob. Verse 3. Now Israel, of course being formed to Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic. Now, before I was a believer, I was in a musical called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I was one of Pharaoh's guard, and I was up there half naked and dancing, and it was so embarrassing. But what I do remember was that the actual the actual outfit was this sort of psychedelic, jacket with tons of colors and so forth. And, it was the first time I ever really heard a Bible story. They're like, this is from the Bible. I remember, like, in practice, they'd be saying this. Like, I'm like, where's the story from? Like, the Bible? And I'm like, oh. But it's not necessarily true if you, in the Hebrew, that word, some believe it would be just very long sleeves, but almost decorative, or in the form of ornamental, like just decorations. So not necessarily like super multicolored. But it showed favoritism. It showed blessing. That's only blessing from God, not necessarily from Jacob, not from Israel. So in verse 4, his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And again, as God reminded me again, that we're also focusing on Jacob, Israel. He's not a perfect man. He's got kids that you're going to see, very seriously messed up. It's oblivious to their anger towards their brother. And he's sort of, he's putting this favoritism. He comes from a situation of favoritism, if you guys recall, with Esau and so forth. And not seeing the realities of that within his own children is, again, not like ignorance, but just kind of aloof. And you got to understand, as children, again, are a reflection of the parents, reflection of the head of the household, the father. And their walk with God is going to be dependent on being taught by their parents. Ultimately, it's going to be their decision whether to follow Christ or so forth. But there is a huge connection between the parental bringing up and the kids themselves. So you're going to see through this situation that there is definitely God's mercy. And you're going to see definitely throughout this that God has definitely blessed Joseph. He's going to put him through a serious tests. Verse 5 to 8, then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Mm-hmm. Now, I was actually corrected by my pastor a couple of weeks ago because I was telling something to an unbeliever. They weren't happy with it. And he said, you got to watch who you speak to. You got to be very careful. who you're telling things to or something, in regards to what God's saying and so forth. It's like there has to be a sort of a caution reality there. But you have this innocent, very innocent Joseph. And what's really great about him, that's sometimes like you see that. I've seen that before. I've seen that in Bible college and so forth, where people get jealous. Yeah. Like he's like, I got this thing from God, and they're just like, well, nothing's going on in my life, Let's hear it, and they're ticked off, and they get angry, and they despise prophetic utterances. They despise these things, and there's an innocence to that person too. And the reality is those people are usually in sin, and they're just like, oh, God's blessing them, And you see that so often. When someone's on fire for God, there's a vileness in the form of religion, just like that. And he said to them, please listen to the dream that I have had. Again, a very innocent story. Let me just tell you about this, not knowing this is going to just create incredible jealousy and incredible anger, and even something that could take away his life. For behold, we are binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down my sheaf. Then his brother said to him, are you actually going to reign over us, or are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Joseph is a picture of Jesus Christ. There's so many parallels, and there will be there's even parallels in here that are the future return of Christ. Joseph is despised by his own, his family just care less, never complaining, never compromised. Here he is, sort of like treated like a slave. He has his prophecies, which will inevitably bring the very salvations, to save the lives, so to speak, of his brothers in this prophecy, but it's being rejected. It's interesting. That's what Jesus did. He went around proclaiming the hope, the freedom, to proclaim. He was basically proclaiming life. He was proclaiming the end of death. And in the midst of this, you see that here. You see this rejected prophecy. It's a lot of pride and a lot of arrogance. Interesting, because it's also somewhat of a future vision of what's to come. Because if you guys see on that little picture on there, God uses things in the world that we work with. So, for instance, what do we do today, right? For instance, Dallas works at AutoZone. Don't be surprised if God doesn't give him a dream where he's fixing a car or something, because it's stuff that he's working with, and that's what they were working with. And sheaves were basically the wheat or whatever, bind up, and that's the picture. I figured I'd give you guys, what's a sheaf. But again, it's like a future vision of bowing down to a Messiah figure of power and authority. It's almost like just a parallel. It's not, it's just a picture of Christ that would end in saving them. Just saving, almost like the Jews themselves finally recognizing their Messiah and saying, "Oh my gosh!" And this is when Joseph returns in authority. He's second command to the Pharaoh. So again, don't despise prophetic utterances. That's a hard issue. Yeah. 37:9-11. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. He related it to his father and to his brothers. So this time he's got his dad on. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you and to the ground? No. His brothers were jealous of him, and his father kept the saying in mind. Now, sequentially, a lot of historical scholars believe that this was something that came before the death of Rachel, because he's talking about his mother. Yeah, this is something to be aware of. I thought she died. So anyway, but what's interesting is the reaction of both of these. You know, when you tell somebody that's kind of half, you know, kind of like, I wouldn't say like compromise, but just kind of like indifferent to God's word, like, or they've experienced God's word, God's power, and now they're kind of like there's a fear and an awe. Jacob is sort of like, it's nonsense, but I'll just keep it in mind, you know. And what's interesting about that is, again, it's a picture of Christ. It's almost like there's this rejection of what was prophesied even by Jesus, by the Pharisees, by his own people. And this whole idea, even the fact that Jesus would proclaim that he was the great, you know, he was God. They wanted to throw him off a cliff. You know, it's like, you're God. You know, you're going to be in charge. You know. And interesting because I think of like even the Pharisees that weren't necessarily, they were kind of half in it and half out of it, you know, when they were, you know, like Nicodemus would visit Jesus, you know, he'd just be like, well, what's going on? I don't understand this, you know, and they just kind of keep it in mind. They wouldn't really, you know. And also the dream itself, the second dream, which has to do with, you know, the idea of stars, moons, and suns representing the family of Israel. This is actually repeated in Revelation 12. 12:1-2 says that Revelation, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. So there's a lot of interesting parallels here. Oh, I knew this would happen. Sorry, guys. Thankfully, I did the smart thing. I labeled every page with a number. So give me a second. Technical difficulty. Okay, verses 12 to 17. For his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. You guys remember Shechem's where the whole dine-in sin occurred? Mm-hmm. Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Very obedient son. This is he's not just going there to hang with them, he's going to inspect. And again, not liking this sort of authority of his younger brother, sort of, having authority as far as like, hey, are you doing your job? Then he said to him, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron and came to Shechem. Again, it's about a two days ride. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering the field, and the man asked him, what are you looking for? And he said, I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock. Then the man said, they have moved from here. For I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after the brothers and found them at Dothan. So he's going to go 20 miles north to Dothan. Mm-hmm. And this is normal, but it's also showing the sovereignty of God, that these events are occurring. They're leading him to this place. And back then it was common that different people that would pasture flocks and so forth, they would know families from the other areas and so forth. And they'd be able to tell them where everybody's at and so forth. Again, Jacob's oblivious to this rivalry, not even aware that this sort of thing is, things are starting to heat up, and sending somebody out to, hey, what are you doing over here? How's it looking? Is really going to get them angry. So then we got verses 18 to 24. It says, when they saw him from a distance and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him. Then let's see what will become of his dreams. It's interesting. It sounds a lot like Jesus. what's going to happen? What happens to Jesus? This is like, let's take him out. But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, let us not take his life. Reuben further said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers, and they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. FYI, pit is a cistern full of water. It's commonly, it's called a pit there, but it's a cistern. Yep. Again, you see this image of Christ, this tearing of the tunic. Matthew 27:35, when they crucified him, they divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothes they cast lots. Verse 25, then they sat down to eat. Gee, what a great family. And as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, and their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover his blood? Verse 27, come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brother listened to him. Sort of a weird, talk about like, he's our brother, it's like, yeah, we're going to sell him into slavery. So this is a really messed up family. But still under the blessings of God. This will be the chosen generation. This will be the chosen lineage that will bring to the Messiah. So it's interesting. It's great family, throws in a pit, has a meal. This is very wicked. Judah. I was kind of reminded of the grace of God, the mercy of God through Judah. We always know Jesus as the Lion of Judah. Judah was wicked. He could care less about the mourning of his dad. What's interesting, in the midst of all this, God didn't forsake him. Judah's going to turn around. He's going to completely turn around and have a whole different change of heart at the end. But the wickedness is just, again, this example. If you check the genealogy of Jesus, it's just filled with just circumstances of people that have really done wicked acts and have been redeemed by God himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember my grandmother, she's Catholic, and I would say to her, you ever read the Bible? She's like, 30 people. It's funny, I kind of brought that on, like, it's true. There's a lot of really dirty people in the Bible, but God himself is the one that makes them clean. And it's a reminder for us because, we're not perfect. And it doesn't give us an excuse to sin. It doesn't give, we have the Spirit of God. It's a whole different story. And by the power of God, we can fulfill what God's will is for lives. But you can see, even right here, without the Spirit of God, it's just a big mess. God didn't forsake them, and he's not going to forsake us. Verse 28, then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up, lifted Joseph out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. So, images of Jesus. Jesus was sold for silver coins. In a way here, you got Judas who gave the location of Jesus, betraying him for silver coins. I think it was 30 coins for Jesus, 20 coins for Joseph. There's also the reality of going to Egypt. It's symbolically sin. It's a temptation. Here we have Joseph going into sin, but he's not going to compromise. He's not going to compromise. He's going to stand strong. And by the way, we're talking about Reuben. There's also this merciful reality of Reuben, because Reuben was the one who was messing around with Jacob's concubine. And here he's like merciful on his brother. So it's interesting even that. And God is the one, I believe, that's just trying to deal with these guys. In the midst of their pride and arrogance, you can see that God's hand is still upon this family. Again, an imperfect family under grace. And again, it's, a lot of people, there's a lot of people that have come out of the sin of like a sexual sin and so forth. But it reminds me of Jesus, who rebuked the Pharisees, describing a repentant, sex-crazed prostitute will get into heaven before they would. The hatred and anger and pride of the Pharisees, he says in Matthew 21:31, it says, which of the two did the will of his father? They said the first. Jesus said to them, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and prostitutes will get in the kingdom of God before you. Again, this pride and jealousy, very much like the Pharisees. Verse 31, so they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in blood. And they sent the vari-colored tunic and brought it to their father and said, we found this, please examine it and see whether it is your son's tunic or not. Then he examined it and said, it is my son's tunic, a wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son. So his father wept for him. So often we end up like Jacob. Mourning for a child is understandable, but to make the assumption, surely I'm going to go to hell. It's just like, it's kind of like, that's a quite heavy test. This is the chosen lineage of the Messiah, that's supposedly dead, and here is this, and that's a test, isn't it? Surely I've gone to, and this is what the devil plants in our minds. We see great things or great calamities or great mishaps, and we say, surely I'm going to hell. Surely I screwed up. Surely I messed up. God's plans are shipwrecked. Mm-hmm. Again, this was the lineage of Jesus, and in the eyes of Jacob, his son was dead. But again, what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. Mm-hmm. And then again, that's a test of faith. And at that time, you'd think he would have just thrown in the towel on that, because we ourselves are imperfect. But these are the kind of things we got to shut down. We have to shut down the lie, no matter what we see in our lives. There's going to be a long series of unjust, unfair, horrific, unjustified events that will take place that will lead to the saving of lives of nations from a famine, which you guys will see in the next coming chapters.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, think of the unjust realities. This is a little sneak peek for the future. A righteous person thrown into slavery by his own family. The accusation of rape by Potiphar's wife.
Yeah.
Imagine if you, a righteous person, did no wrong, like Joseph, were accused in the eyes of the nation of the United States for having raped the vice president. Okay, because that's how crazy it is, because Potiphar was a very high figure. He was I forgot who Pastor Mike.
Yeah, he was way up there.
Something in arms. I got his title. But he was way up there. So imagine that. You think about bad events, being accused of rape of a high political figure's wife, thrown into prison. But despite all that, as you'll see in the future, he still interprets dreams. He's still doing God's will. He's still using the gifts God has given. He still, without fear, goes forth and proclaims, even to Pharaoh, even bad news that's coming. And that's something we got to keep in mind is these unfair events that we will see in our lives. We have to still stand strong and proclaim God's word and proclaim it with God's heart, as even like Pastor Mike was saying. God's heart has to be it. It can be bad things. It could be a global famine. Mm-hmm. But in the midst of all these unfair, unjust events, God's will was being accomplished. That's the funny thing. And that's I think that's what God wanted me to remind me for you guys. Again, as you look around you, this is the time God's telling us to brace yourself. We're bracing ourselves on the rock. That's what we brace ourselves with. Joseph did not complain. He trusted God through the whole thing. And again, all in the midst of all of what we look at in our lives, what we see around us right now, presently, as wicked events, God has a purpose for these. God is allowing these to get his purpose and his will done. So we shouldn't be so grievous, even if we see these wicked events. We can't sit there and go, I will go down to hell. It's a bit kind of like, what's the word? I'm trying to word. What's the word? It's paradox. You might think it's a paradox, but it's not. Again, God has a plan. Good things will come. You just got to trust God. It could be a long haul. This was a long haul for Joseph. He went through a lot. He kept quiet and trusted God. He had mercy on Joseph's brothers. These guys wanted to stop God's will. They wanted to stop God's plan. Wanted to dream a day. Destroy the redemptive plan. Not just for their lives in the midst of this temporary famine in the future, but also stop the Messiah from coming. It's funny because even the works of the Antichrist, who's not even here yet, are going to be horrific, but they're going to be used to fulfill God's word. Revelation 6:10 says, and they cried out with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on earth? And there was given to them, each of them, a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. There's a completion even in the midst of the persecution and the martyrdom of the saints. And this is all part of the progression of God's plan. We will suffer greatly for God's glory. I suggest we get used to it. You see persecution, tribulation, and unjust events that throw you as everything you can name it, from being accused of being a rapist to being thrown in jail. Things that make the society just shuns you. These are just realities that we got to face up to, and say, blessed is us for being persecuted. Greater is our reward in heaven. Don't get caught off, as Pastor Mike always says. Don't get caught off in the minutia. Even for today, we are not to complain. We are to proclaim, and we are to proclaim Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's good. When someone comes up to you and says, who's going to win the election? You say, I don't know. Let me tell you about Jesus. They ask you, I think there's going to be a second wave of COVID. You say, I don't know. Let me tell you about Jesus. Will there be a Great Depression or a Civil War in November? I don't know. Let's talk about Jesus. Joseph didn't complain. He trusted, and he used his gifts. His gifts of interpreting dreams. And God brought him low and then raised him up to be second in command of a nation. So ask God through this time to use your gifts. Look at the situation. It's bad, it's horrible, it's unjust. Oh, I can't pay my bills, I can't do this, that. You got to ask. You got to remember Joseph went through all this too. Yeah. But he stayed quiet, he trusted in God. You got to ask yourself, yeah, this kind of sucks, but God, what do you want to do here? Yes. And that's how you're going to be part of his plan, is despite all what's going on, you're saying you have a purpose in this. This is what you're going to use. It may look like total chaos, but you're using it. You are in control, you are in command, and your will be done. So help me be a part of your will. Let's pray. Well, last verse, 39. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him to Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's official and captain of the bodyguard. There's his official name. Father God, just thank you for today, Lord. Let us just trust and relax and just trust in you, God, as we see the events unfold, Lord. And let's not miss what you're doing in the midst, Lord. You haven't told us to sit still.
Yes, God.
You told us to use our gifts as Joseph used his gifts. He didn't sit around complaining. He just waited in the worst of persecution, in the worst of situations, probably looked upon as Egypt as a prisoner rapist. And think about it. Just thinking about that, Lord, it's crazy.
Yes.
So we pray, God, that we not ruffle our feathers, Lord, this time, but we proclaim Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The message that this is really all about.
Yes.
In Jesus' name.
Amen. To be able to turn this on stream.
No.
My apologies, man. I'm a technical nerd.